Hello and welcome to Let's Grill John. My name is Phil Mapeys. This is John Mackenzie. Up there, above me, University Challenge style. How are we doing, John?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. It's a nice sunny day. A little bit of chess analysis. What better way to kick off a weekend, eh?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not sunny here. You're about, 150 miles away from me. It's Duke here. It's absolutely horrible.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, never mind. Anyway, what are we doing today? Tell everybody why we're looking at this game between Winower and Poulsen from 1881. We're always topical on the chess pit, right? So.
Yeah, well, at the moment I'm watching through the top 50 on chess24.com. They've attempted to sort of do a Bill Simmons style top 50 chess players of all time, and think about how do you overcome the issues of the fact that when people started playing chess they were largely quite rubbish. How do you sort of collate or build a pyramid of players that accurately reflects the top 50. So I came across this game through that, but it was interesting for me because the opening is quite similar to the opening that I played in my famous victory.
Very famous.
In 4NCL. And I just wondered what you would think of it, and whether or not we could draw any lessons from it, or how I could have done things better in the way that I'd played the last game.
Okay, great. Yeah. We did talk a little bit in episode 38, which is, as you can see, out now. And we talked about the mid-19th century and how far you'd have to go back for anybody, whoever it was, to have a shot at being the best in the world. And we reckoned, me and Chris, we'd have a shot if it was something in the region of 1780. And then you were a bit earlier. But yeah, the things that we know now about the game, it means that it's not necessarily useful from if you were basing your entire learning on these games, you might then struggle to have any proper opening theory or any real any real nous at the beginning of the game. But what these games are good for is to dip in and out of occasionally and to see what's changed. But yeah, it's still the same game, and these players were still decent by modern standards. They would probably be amongst, I don't know, 2500, 2550 maybe. Decent players. And yeah, so let's have a look at this game. So Winower has this particular opening named after him in the French. So the bishop b4, this is the Winower French. But he's up against today Mr. Poulsen, who, as white, who plays. Guess what? What's the opening called, John?
Oh, I can't remember.
It's the Poulsen.
No, is it?
Mr. Poulsen played the Poulsen, so this is why it's named after him. He chose this way of getting his pieces so that
this is pretty much exactly the same as what my opening was.
Yeah,
Apart from I think I pushed the pawn slightly earlier and brought the knight to c3, the following move after the things had flipped over, I think.
Yeah, you had what is the entire point of this structure?
That's the Najdorf structure, isn't it? That's how I think of that. So it stops the bishop.
The Najdorf is slightly different. So the Najdorf goes.
The Najdorf is just you would just But
what's the idea of playing a6 in the Sicilian?
Yeah. In the Sicilian, it's to stop the bishop coming down onto b5 and then swapping off your bishops.
It's actually more to do with this knight.
Oh, really? This
knight, if black is going to move their e-pawn, then this becomes weak, and to discourage knight b5 is quite important. Also, it's to... this bishop rarely has a home because these squares are all out of commission, realistically. So if black can play b5 and bishop b7 instead and get this long diagonal, they tend to be doing okay as well. So there's lots of sort of myriad reasons for it, but yeah, the hyper version of this is to play this a6 stuff immediately, where it's just a very solid base there are lots of dark squared holes, but because this pawn, because yeah, if white's going to make anything happen here, they generally have to play d4, which is what winner were played. And after takes, it's going to be easier for black to take control of this diagonal. Eventually,
this is exactly the structure that we had in the game.
Yeah, so the black is just playing very much on the light squares, but that allows this bishop to become a good piece and float in and out of those dark squares. But what white should do is just play solidly and sort of wait for things to happen. So queen c7, bishop d3, castles. And then, yeah, so we have this. This is almost identical insofar as you you took this knight, didn't you?
Yeah.
And I had a go at you for it.
Yeah.
The difference between this and if we just I'm just going to flip back to that game. So we had it. Where were we? Here. So we've got this position versus this one. What is the difference here? What has happened already for you? What's the difference?
The knight is already out on f6. I've already got the knight defended as well on d.
There's no actual reason to take it here. Whereas here, the knight, because the bishop's come to d3, this is actually an attack.
Yeah, right.
So just getting out of an attack with a tempo, in this case, taking here, is going to be a bit better for you. Because yeah, you gain a tempo from what you would have done if you just. I still prefer knight b3, just getting out of the way, because you're always going to have more space, and so when you have more space, you shouldn't necessarily be swapping off pieces. But what black?
When you say you have more space, you just mean in terms of what, like raw territory?
It's a bit of both. So territory is to do with it. If you have pawns further forwards, there's going to be more space in behind. That's definitely one thing. But here, if you just look at the black pieces, let's just put that back. It's going to take a long time for this bishop to come out. Black is still 2 moves away from castling. And using those, let's say 4 tempi, because you've probably got to move to get your complete development here as black. You've got to move one of these pawns. So let's say this guy, this bishop, and then castling. That's 4 tempi to complete the development, whereas it's going to take you 1. So here the space is really just for the pieces themselves. There's nothing really in the way of anything happening, and you have good opportunities in the medium short term to play moves like f4 and f5 or e5 to gain even more space. So yeah, generally we talk about in terms of the pawns, but here we've got you can just see, just visually, white just has a lot more opportunities with these pieces to get them out quickly, and that is largely because you've castled. It just affords this opportunity. The king doesn't get in the way of anything anymore on e1, and yeah, so that's what we talk about with space. Anyway, winner took, takes, and then yeah, f4, this move, which is, I mean, we've got to put this in the context of 140-year-old theory, right? So here, I think black is doing absolutely fine, but I would again say this is one of these positions that I say it's objectively equal or objectively level. But practically, I think it's easier for white to play, and it's just based on this space thing, where white is the one coming forwards, white is the one with the ideas, white is the one driving the play, and it's not just a case of how that works out on the board; it's how it works out psychologically as well. Where if you feel like you're the one doing stuff, that's going to help you. And this is why I think it's really important for you, John, to really nail down your opening theory, so that you have confidence to have ideas in the opening rather than just sort of fiddling around and just desperately trying to get everything vaguely okay, which seemed to be the case the other night. Is that fair?
It's very much my approach, hoping that everything will be general.
Okay, so d5. This move, yeah, if black can get in d5 in the Sicilian, they tend to be doing pretty well. Why do you think that is?
Because I guess the e pawn, there's already space in the middle of white's defensive structure. So is it just a case of blitzing open the center of the board a little bit more and sort of making a space in their pawn structure?
Well, it's just in the Sicilian, you already get. I mean, we talked about it last week where I can't remember who it was. It was like it might have been Ben Larson. I think he said that d4 is a mistake because you're swapping off a peripheral pawn for a central pawn. So what black needs to do with that is then use it. But yeah, d5 in particular tends to be useful because it is, as you say, challenging the untouched white pawn on e4, if it ever lets me play it again. There we go. Right, so white played queen f3. And this is an unusual square for the queen in a lot of openings, but in here it makes a lot of sense. Why does queen f3 make a lot of sense here? Normally in the Sicilian we'd play moves like we'd play bishop e3 and then queen d. Oop, that's not e3, is it? Playing bishop e3 and then queen to d2 instead. But why here does it make a lot of sense?
Well, it seems like everything's sort of arrowing in on e4. It gets you over onto the king side as well. It gives you the access to that side of the board.
Yep, you might want to chuck these over. Why? I mean, when we bring the queen out for the first time, what should be the main thing you're thinking about?
What's the most threatening position you could put it on?
No, I think we should flip it round.
Okay, so the lead. It's not going to be under any threat here.
Yeah, so this is the point. Yeah, you don't want to be bringing your queen out and then suddenly finding that it's either immediately under attack and gaining tempi for your opponent, or just getting stuck. Because when there's lots of pieces on the board, particularly lots of pawns, the queen can very easily find itself in a whole world of trouble. But here, because all of these pawns exist, it's going to take a long time for this bishop to have any say over the positioning of your queen. So, and this knight can't get to d4 quickly. Yeah, the queen is very nicely placed there. As you say, it's in a position where if things open up, it might be able to look up there and maybe flicking over to one of these squares to start having a go once black is castled, which they still haven't done. Bishop b7, and then this just little move, king h1, just getting the king out of the way of anything on this diagonal. What else might this allow long term? What else might happen?
I'm not sure, but this is something that I should probably have done in my game as well, because there was an issue with being pinned. I think that came up in my game similarly. I don't know. What does it allow you to push your pawns?
It may well do. The fact that the king gets out of the way. If the black king is going to end up on g8, you may then wish to use the g file and start chucking this up. I think it's less likely in a position where this bishop stays on the board, because long term black can maybe try to shift these pawns out of the way, and suddenly this bishop is doing very nasty things indeed. But here yeah, the king just tucks itself out of the way. There's no checks, and it's also just a thing of black needs to now make a decision. White has this very simple plan of just putting their pieces on better squares and waiting to see where black puts this bishop. And black put this bishop on e7. So nothing, no particular dangers here. And yeah, white still has to solve the issue of this bishop on c1. And it's not so clear where this is going to go. But anyway, so let's just take stock here and let's just try and judge this position by its merits. We know white played b3 next, but let's actually just have a think about what might also work. So we can have a look at this position. Just tell me some things about it. Are you does this position fill you with joy as white?
I think the white position is better than the black position.
Okay, why?
Because it feels...
Let's quantify this. Let's assess this properly.
Well, you've got the light squared bishop is obviously like on the long diagonal, but it's not going to do anything there for a while unless the pawn structure changes.
Okay.
You've got neither of your rooks engaged in the game. Your dark squared bishop isn't doing anything that threatening. It's just sort of moved out of the way so that you can castle. You have a decent pawn structure in the center of the board. But it feels as though white, it has the potential to be more expansive quicker.
Because
the pieces are in situations where it feels as though they have access to other parts of the board.
Keep going with this. Like, where is the focus of white's position? Where are most of the pieces kind of pointing?
Towards the king side, and it feels as though like there's a lot of space on the king side for white, and white can get there quite nicely and can cause problems.
Is there a particular square of this focus?
It feels to me like G7 is quite weak.
Okay.
Obviously you can tighten that up quite quickly, but then as soon as you start moving the pawn structure around, then open spaces are gonna...
But do you have anything looking at G7 right now?
No,
but this might
like
be
you say, you can easily get onto... I mean, white is about to... Well, is going to plan to fianchetto, right? And that will point along that line. You've got the queen quite easily available there. You can shift the knight across quite comfortably into that area. You've already got the rook looking down the f file as well. It just feels as though everything's pointing that way a little bit. But I suppose in this situation that black could castle queen side if they wanted.
I think that's unlikely. This is just so weak, and there's already one open file, and I think that it'll take a lot for... I mean, black isn't necessarily so badly set up defensively. Like, this can hop over, but it's just... Yeah, I think that there are enough holes on this side of the board. We talked about the b file, this pawn, for white to really be able to go for something. But I want to just absolutely zone you in here. Which is the square where most of your, as in the most pieces, are looking? Which square?
E4.
That is 1, 2, 3. There's one with more. So this is something when in a position like this where black's just played bishop e7. There's clearly no big threat, otherwise they'd have played it. So we've got time here to really nail down what we want.
F5.
F5. Because if we play F5, we get 1, 2, 3, 4. Queen, rook, pawn, bishop, everything is pointing there. And that's not necessarily always the best thing to do, because you've got to consider what else happens. It would open up the diagonal for this queen, it would weaken e5 and g5. But the point here is that we're starting to make things happen where we already set up. And that might be a coincidence, or it might be very deliberate on our part that we put pieces where they can start to do things. Okay, so let's just have a look at f5. It wasn't played in the game. But if f5, then I think black doesn't really have a choice here. What do you think black should play? Where are we? What is black? How is black going to deal with this?
I don't know. I'm always too quick to just resolve tensions, but
well, does it make sense for the f-file to open when these pieces are loaded up?
Yeah, no,
it doesn't.
Yeah.
So what does black have to play?
Takes.
No, because that would open it up.
Oh right. Okay.
Takes. Then this is. I'm not saying it's bad. I just think black is letting themselves in for some trouble.
So you're going to put pressure on G2 square, then just move your bishop across and point your queen and your bishop at G2.
Yeah, but what is black going to do? What can black do now to avoid the f-file being opened?
Oh, just castle.
No, because that would open up this way. It'd still open it up.
Push the pawn.
Right, e5 just shuts it down. Black gets a nice centre, but we have now we have this little pawn chain which really informs the directionality of the play. And yeah, everything should start to be moving towards the king, or towards the king's side at the very least. So yeah, move like bishop g5 here, and then I don't know, queen d6 seems reasonable, but you've just got a very nice setup where there's nothing unusual about where your pieces are, right? This all seems fairly thematic, fairly basic, fairly centralized. And from here, yeah, I think you've got a very simple plan of chucking this pawn up. So something like bishop h4 with the idea of playing it in here, or maybe even playing bishop g3 to target this loose pawn. It's all fine. But yeah, b3 is just as played in the game, is just doesn't. I don't really see the point of this move. I think black can do stuff to stop this bishop having influence on this diagonal, like d4, which would also help this bishop, right? So b3 I don't really see the point of. I don't think that's a good move. And black actually played d4 immediately, which in this case is not good. So it's a bit soon, because after knight d1 and then c5, where is the white still has this. Basically, I think black should have played d4 once this bishop had moved, because now it's still got the opportunity to come out towards the king. But which square near the center has really been weakened by all these pawn moves by black? Where is there now an outpost?
Well, I guess b6 theoretically.
Well, b6 was an outpost on move 3. There was already one then.
Yeah.
But where is there one now? In this position.
d6.
No. When we say outposts, I mean, yeah, you're right. These are all outposts. These are squares that can't ever be hit by a black pawn. But what's changed since here?
You can now get onto c4.
Yeesh. So this is just a really useful square for your knight to get to. So I think the best move here is just knight b2, with the idea of just lumping this in here, and there's nothing really that black can do. It's very difficult for black to pile up significant pressure on this pawn, because I mean, what would be the best piece to look at this pawn to start really trying to take advantage of the pin?
The black piece.
Yeah, if you've got a pinned piece, in this case a pinned pawn, what generally will you want to pile up? Which piece would you like to use to pile up more pressure on that pinned pawn?
Another pawn.
Yeah, but we can't do that here because it's blocked by the knight. And if that knight moves, then suddenly, yeah, it's not really going to work. And I don't think particularly you would want to play f5 anyway, because it's going to weaken everything around the king. So actually the white, and if black piles up a third piece on it, then we've just got rook e1. So it's 3 versus 3. So there's no particular danger now with that pin, now that this pawn has disappeared. So the opportunity here to take control of the c4 outpost and start looking in this way might have been better, but actually black Winnower played knight f2 instead, which I must admit I don't understand again, but there we go. I guess he was slightly concerned about the safety of the pawn and wanted to, I suppose you need to defend this pawn again if you're going to then move the queen out of the way. So I think that's the idea, but this was an open goal. So anytime you've got outposts on, largely on the, I mean, if you can take outposts on the 6th rank, you're laughing generally. 5th rank is very good, but also don't ignore the ones on your own half of the board, because a knight or a bishop here will still look into your opponent's half of the board, right? So I think that was probably a better idea. Anyway, black finally castled, move 14. And yeah, so this must have been the idea. So queen h3. The knight, yeah, defends the pawn, but it's just, the knight's just in the way. It's not a good piece. But I suppose there's chances for it to come later on to g4, maybe. Okay. Knight d7. Horrible. Why is this a horrible move?
Because he's undefended h7.
I don't get it. There's no need here. I mean, there is a threat here, of course, right? With if e5. If e5, eventually, when my mouse allows me, then, yeah, you're attacking the knight and you're threatening mate. But black could have very easily just played e5 here to arrest that threat. This bishop on d3 is now long term not particularly impressive because it's completely stunted by its own pawn on e4. And yeah, while f5 takes us to a position that was fairly similar to what we had before with f5, it's, I don't know, this position just doesn't make sense to me now that the knight is on f2 after f5. I don't see how these pieces, you just sense like the malcoordination here.
Yeah.
This knight just, it wants to be here. Or
the dark squared bishop can go all the way across as well, yeah.
I suppose you can then come to g4 maybe to swap off the knights, but it's all very yeah, it just doesn't really make sense to me. Anyway, knight d7 is a horrible move, and yeah, we can now just long term have this pawn battery on e4 and f4. Right, bishop d2. So white's just playing a nice developing move, just preparing to bring in even more pieces. This rook on a1 in the corner is now very much in commission. Likewise the bishop. a5. Probably the wrong side of the board to be playing on. But if white didn't particularly fancy them b4 happening or c3, then I don't know, it's again one of these positions that again black is fine objectively, but white just holds all the trumps. to do what they want to do. E5 with the aforementioned mating threat. G6 makes sense. You generally want to move the pawn. That keeps the bishop out, because we're not going to be able to keep the queen out long term. But h6 doesn't really do anything about this square. And also it provides a... If you're playing h6, there's two reasons why, if you're dealing with a light square bishop, it's not necessarily a good idea to play h6, even if it blunts the queen. One is that the diagonal hasn't been shut, but there's another very good reason why playing h6 is not a good idea if there's a queen looking all the way up.
I guess because you're
just ring d8. Sorry.
I guess because you're weakening the light squares, right?
That's one reason. Yes. So g6 itself is weakened. What else? How is white going to crash this open, smash open this kingside?
I guess pushing the g pawn.
Maybe, but generally, it's just the fact that this pawn is now a target, and it's only defended once. So if you get,
and you can also get it pinned quite easily as well if you wanted.
There's stuff where you can just play knight g4 and take this. You sacrifice your knight for both of these pawns. Whereas after g6, the pawn is defended twice. So in order for white to smash it open, they're going to need 3 pieces to be taking on g6. One isn't going to be enough here. So yeah, g6 just makes sense all round. Knight g4. Outpost. And black just completely ignores everything. It's just very strange play by Paulsen. Having said that, it's unclear what black should do instead. Maybe something like queen c6, so that there's at least some kind of counter threats along the open diagonal, so that this queen can't get, which is tied to the defense of g2, can't get too airy-fairy with its approach. But yeah, this is a4 just makes absolutely zero sense in this position. And white punished black here with f5 and starting to really motor and make things happen. And this is a really sexy position. But let's just look at it. It's just a numbers game, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 attacking pieces. We can add this pawn into the mix. 6. How many defensive pieces does black have, realistically?
3, 4.
1, 2 pieces and then a couple of pawns. It's yeah, it's not good. Not good. And these pieces are just doing very, very little to aid in the defense here. Never mind. White took, and then yeah, was this the move that really attracted you to this game?
I mean, the thing that really attracted me was just the similarities between it and the game that I played.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so this whole thematic break of f5 is definitely something you should look out for in the Sicilian. If you're playing open Sicilians, if you're going to get this f4 stuff in, try and get f5 in, because it's going to really go after any pawns that exist here. And generally in the Sicilian, you'll get one of those pawns. Because in dragon setups, you get this structure. In Paulsen's, like we're looking at, and Scheveningen's and Taimanov's, you get pawn structure like this or this. Yeah, it's almost inevitable. I think possibly the Sveshnikov Sicilian is one where you wouldn't get this structure, because it tends to be more like this. And f5, you can't get in f5 yourself. But yeah, generally, against most lines, you want to be playing this move. It just opens everything up for everything. And here, as we've said, white has plenty of pieces to be doing their own thing. Right, pawn takes, and then yeah, rook takes. Lovely. So what's the difference here between, why is the rook expendable but the bishop isn't? Why did he take with the rook rather than the bishop?
Because presumably you want the bishop to continue looking at h7.
That's long-term strategy. Why else?
Um,
Just more in terms of what I was talking about, the numbers here. Why is this rook expendable? But the bishop.
I guess you can replace it with another rook as well if you want.
Exactly. You can never replace a light squared bishop, but you can replace this rook with this guy. And this is here it's a bit more stark because it's a rook for a pawn. But normally we're thinking about this in terms of the exchange sacrifices that you get. Like a rook takes f6, or with black a rook takes c3. The rook can be replaced. So you are basically taking away a defensive piece, but not realistically losing an attacking piece because it just gets replaced. So it's quite a nice way of doing things. Right, rook takes f5, and yeah, this is the problem. Black cannot take this rook. If they do, it gets horrible extremely quickly. Bishop takes f5, and this is not going to last much longer. We've got the mate threat on h7, and there's very little that black can do here. So instead we had queen to c6, a bit late, but I suppose rook f2, just taking the rook out of harm's way and also defending the g2 pawn so that the queen can go and do stuff. f5, well, it's desperation mode now really, and yeah, this isn't much fun. But notice how where the white pieces are. White's done nothing particularly special, have they, John? Just open things up, and then they're just going to calmly take advantage of all the weaknesses that have been created. Knight h6 check. Oh dear. Why not knight h6? What opportunity did white have here after f5?
To get the bishop on h6?
No. What special move does white have available to them here? Once that pawn's come up 2 squares.
You can attack the comparative knight.
No. It's a big thing in the podcast, John. This little maneuver that you can do. Going back to what, episode 5, I think, where we had a game with these rules.
Davignon rules. Oh, yeah. En passant.
You can just open en passant. But you can only do that on the first move, right? So getting rid of this opportunity to do it doesn't really make much sense. Now, black does have 4 pieces looking at the f6 square. But, yeah, this is not really relevant here, because all you're doing is opening up, as you say, this bishop on d3. So look, keep looking at these weak pawns on the king side, and I think that this won't last much longer. Something like knight takes f6, and then really we're going to be piling up everything. We can place on a bishop c4 check, knight d5. This all just looks. And then we've got this pin. The king is wide open. We've still got a queen. We've still got a rook. I can't see this lasting much longer, to be quite honest with you. It's just too many pieces aiming at the king. But when we played, knight h6 first, as Winnower did, it's it doesn't make any sense, because you want to be opening up lines towards the king, right? And black now has this pawn entrenched on f5, which also gains them a bit of space. Not only does it open up, with taking on passing on, I've opened this up for the bishop, it opened up the f file for the rooks. But there we go. This was 1881, and nobody was perfect. Okay, king h8. Rook e1. I mean, white is still doing fine here, but the speed at which they can attack has definitely been decreased by this. Incidentally, if everything came off here, all the pieces hoovered off, who's winning the king and pawn ending?
White.
Why?
Just guessed. No, probably black actually.
Why?
Because no, white's got a pass pawn.
Yeah. Is it able to be supported?
Yes.
By?
Rook.
Well, I mean, so I'm saying everything comes off. Let's imagine we just have a king and pawn ending.
Yeah, I guess the king could snaffle it up quite quickly.
Yeah, this is the problem you've got. It's a bit too far advanced for a pawn that's doesn't have any friends either side, for an isolated pawn. So yeah, I think that.
So black really should be just trying to swap off pieces here then, is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's not easy to do though, because whites are on good squares, they're entrenched there. And the pawn itself does a good job of just controlling some squares in the opponent's half of the board. Anyway, pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Knight to b6. Paulson here had a real obsession with the queen side. And it just doesn't make any sense. What he's doing again is dragging this knight. This move was one of the worst in the game. And then he's dragging it even further away from the defense of the king. It doesn't make any sense at all. I know where the knight's going. It's going to d5 to try and maybe come into e3 or c3 and just generally sort of help out. But it's too slow. The knight belonged on d7 such that if e6 was played, the knight could just hop into this nice little square of an f6 and do some defensive jobs. And maybe even come into e4. But it's just too far away on b6 now, and winner wasted no time in getting on with it. e6, good move. This is now a definite threat. c4, again this preoccupation with the queen side. I think by this point winner was just, you know, when you have a plan, it's like fantasy football where you stick with players who really shouldn't still be in your team just because they'll definitely score next week, they'll definitely do this, they're definitely going to keep a clean sheet. Paulson's stuff here is that he's just ignoring, going, no, it's definitely not happening. I can make my own stuff on the queen side. All my pieces are there. It doesn't matter. It does not. When you've got this much of a numerical advantage in your attacking pieces, you can probably afford to get rid of this guy, as we've seen. Right, knight f7 check, king g8, and yeah, now that the f file is been compromised, white can start to afford to, because we've got, let's count them up again, 1 2 3 4 5.5 versus, well, what's actually realistically helping on the light squares? 1 2. There's nothing going on here for black in terms of defensive pieces, so we can
bishop f5.
Yeah, they're just
bishop takes f5.
They're just expendable, right? It's just getting rid of one for, I mean, if black took this, then it's mate in 2, right? Bishop g5, queen g takes g5. So it's not just an expendable piece; it's a free pawn, and we're going to take free pawns. But also, you just generally you want to attack pawn chains from the back, because you're removing the supports as you go up. But here it makes just as much sense to just snaffle off the front one and go in that way. Bishop to f6, and I think winner didn't necessarily play this the best, but let's have a look at it anyway. So bishop takes g6, pawn takes. So we've now got 1 2 3 4 attacking pieces versus not a whole lot, but we can actually just remove one of those straight away. Rook takes f6, threatening mate, and black has no choice here but to give up a piece to remove that queen. Bishop takes, king g7, and white is now just a piece up, piece and a pawn up. Rook uf1, and that was it. So let's just go through the key points here. So the opening, yeah, it's generally a good idea against these sort of Paulson setups to play bishop to d3. It looks like a slightly awkward position for the bishop, but the idea is that it doesn't really have a good home anywhere else if black is going to load up the centre with pawns on light squares, right? And it doesn't get in the way of the queen on e2. And long term, as we've seen, you genuinely have the opportunity to chuck it at the king. And then this f4, the f4 stuff, yeah, you're just, everything you're doing is focused in this direction. So it makes sense to have the focus here so that you're going to play f5 at some point. And when it came, eventually, after a couple of missed opportunities to play it, it was quite good. At some point, I'll get f5. Let's do it like this. Right. And then, yeah, f5 breaks everything open. You've got to play on the same color as these pawns if you're going to use, if you're going to get rid of them. If there was an opportunity to, you know, use these outposts in a good way, then you do that instead. But here, white just bashed down the door. And this is quite nice as well. The concept of being able to replace attacking pieces with others, and then yeah, this is a big missed opportunity to just open it up further with en passant, and then yeah, it doesn't really work. But then from then on, yeah, black's focus on the queen side was just bizarre. I didn't really understand what the whole point of that was. So this is much a defensive lesson for you as much as anything, where if your opponent's coming at you on one flank, if you can, play in the centre, because it will disrupt their attack, because their long range pieces will have to go peripherally, they'll have to go round if you control the centre. But once you've done that, I mean, unless their king is on the opposite side of the board and your attack is quicker, you should always be playing on the same side to just shore it up. Whereas here, white's king was safely tucked away on the king's side. It made absolutely no sense to play moves like this and c4. It was just it was putting the blinds up and ignoring the war going on outside. It was not brilliant play by Mr. Paulson. But yeah, I'm glad you found this game, and I'm glad that you're finding your own material and finding your own sort of ways of thinking about what you want to do in the opening. That's really cool. Are you playing again on Tuesday?
I don't know. I haven't agreed yet. I've got a really busy week coming up because of football. Leeds are playing on Monday and Friday, which accelerates my schedule. So I'm not sure if I'll have time. I'd quite like to, but I'm not sure if I'll have the luxury of 3 hours free on a Tuesday night.
That's true. Yeah, I'm playing in the London League on Wednesday.
Nice.
So that's my first proper game since June. But yeah, I don't know. I think I've got half term these 2 weeks, and I feel like I should use them to do stuff that's actually relevant to my job. Just play a bit more. Yeah. Anyway, episode 38 is out. It's been out a couple of days now, and we talk about lots of things. The title is the most controversial yet, where we went on a rant about the corpse of Mikhail Tal, but there we go. And yeah, we have another one out every week, and you can find us on all good and bad podcast platforms. We also put all of these videos on our YouTube channel, so if you are watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, please do on both Twitch and YouTube. Right, John, let's go and watch some football.
All right.
Merseyside derby, 35 minutes time. Yeah, should be fruity. I predicted an Everton win.
Wow.
Because I just can't see Liverpool defence. If they ship 7 to Villa, how many are they going to ship to Dominic Calvert-Lewin and James Rodriguez?
Well, I think Liverpool will win.
Do you? Are you just being contrarian, or are you just being big football maths.
No, I think the Villa result was probably a one-off.
Right, let's hope so, because 7-2 is just mad.
Well, yeah.
Anyway, right. Thank you, John. Hope you enjoyed that, and thank you,
Yeah,
you
very
guys.
much.
I'll see you again soon.